If you got kids who are thinking about going to college, you might have something called a 529 plan. It's a way to save up money tax-free and even get a deduction here in the state. Did you know you might be able to help out your K-12 kids on that as well? From the Independence Institute, Pam Benigno, thank you for being here.
Hello, John.
And from ACE Scholarships, what was your name again? Ross Izard. Good to see you again. How are you?
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
All right, first of all, the tax code is confusing enough. So 529s, what are they?
Well, many years ago, the IRS, or Congress probably approved, to say that if you will save up for your children's college, we'll let it grow tax-free. And so I think all the states have jumped in. It has to be run by a state program, and in Colorado, ours is called College Invest. They have 4 different kinds of plans you can choose from to put money in for kids' college. Aunt Susie can donate, can contribute to it, and Grandpa Mike and all these different folks, lots of people contribute so that this child has money when it's time for college.
And the cool thing is that money can grow tax-free. And in Colorado, not in all states, but in Colorado, there's a tax deduction you can take off your state taxes for this,
yes,
right?
There is a tax deduction, not a credit, but a tax deduction at the state level. And that's what is complicating things these days.
Complicated? This is good stuff.
Well, it is good, but with the new Trump tax law, the Tax Cuts and Job Act, they expanded it to K-12 education, where you could use the money for K-12 education at a private school and for homeschooling. And our state law does not align with federal law.
All right, let's forget about the state law for just a second. So the new laws that just passed Congress on the federal level said that 529 that you used to use just for college, if you have one, you could still use that now for K-12 expenses, going to a private school or homeschooling. So you could pull out that money and use it not just for college, but before college. That's awesome.
Right. Isn't
That's
it?
terrific.
It's fantastic.
God. You know what Ross is going to do? He's going to say there's some sort of problem with it.
Yeah, so I mean, the issue is that, as Pam said, you can put money into these things, you get a deduction for how much you put in, and federal law now says, hey, if you want to invest in your kid's education before college, which makes good sense, right? Because if you're not investing before college and they're not ready when they get to college, you can have an awful lot of money in a savings account. It's not going to matter that much if they don't have the skill set. So if you decide to take some of this money in your own savings account, put it towards K-12, the feds say that's fine. You can do up to $10,000.
Helps them get ready for college.
That's right.
Great.
So in Colorado, though, you can only make withdrawals from your Colorado 529 account for very specific reasons. And those reasons do not explicitly include K-12. So even though the feds say, hey, it's okay for you to do this, the state of Colorado's law is a little bit shadier on it, and in fact probably says that that's not a qualified withdrawal. So the feds say it's great.
By the way, I also like the way you say probably, because a lot of this stuff is really vague and it hasn't been worked through. So you're telling me in Colorado I can still pull out money when my kid goes to college and use that money for college. If I want to use that money before she gets to college at a private school or for homeschooling expenses, if I pull out that money from the 529, which the feds now say I can, what law am I breaking? What could happen to me?
So what could happen is the state could sit down, and there are some legal opinions on this that are very interesting, that say you can put your money into a 529 as usual, and you still get a tax deduction as usual, a state tax deduction. If you go back and withdraw that money for K-12 after the fact, though, it's very likely that they'll say that that's not a qualified withdrawal. So what happens then is the state comes back to you and recaptures your deduction, which is...
Wait, excuse me, I like that term, recapture.
Sure, it's a really nice way to say takes back by force. So they come to you and say to you, look, you owe us this amount of money from last year or the previous year, whenever you made the contribution that you eventually pulled out for this K-12 expense. And you could get hit with a pretty big bill. If you're putting the full $10,000 in for just one kid, you're getting around a $460 tax benefit from that once you factor in the deduction. So you figure if you've got multiple kids across this, even if you're not making the maximum amount, you could have the government coming back to you and saying, hey, you owe us hundreds of dollars after the fact, which is not going to feel very good for parents who are trying to save for their kids' education.
Not only would they say you owe us the money back, but my guess is there'd be a few penalties involved as well. So the state could go after people who are just trying to help out their kids and using the federal law. You said something that's got me confused, though, because I didn't know until now, because I've got cheap relatives that Aunt May could actually put money into my kids' 529.
Right, and Aunt May have put money in 5 years ago. And who's to say what money the parent took out of the account
Right, because
to pay for the K through 12 education? Was it Aunt May? Was it Grandpa Mike's money?
So in other words, when the money leaves the 529 and goes to help a kid in private school in Colorado in K through 12, the state comes back and says, you got to give that money back, but there were
Well, the
5
deduction.
of us.
Yeah,
you
somebody's going to have to pay.
Somebody's going to have to pay. Well,
for that recapture.
Who pays? And the answer right now is nobody knows.
How's the state going to ever figure it out?
All right. Well, all right. By the way, these type of glitches happen all the time. Federal law and state law do different things. Thanks to the Trump tax cuts and then what happened in Senate Bill 267, we're going to be paying a lot more in state income tax because the changes change which line item on the federal form that we use to start our taxes in Colorado. So in a couple of years, the state's going to be flowing in hundreds of millions of dollars, up to $900 million of new taxes that we'll be paying. You know, a good state legislature would say, well, let's fix that and lower our tax rate, but they're, of course, not going to do that. So, but it requires the legislature to get aligned with it. So don't worry. We've got our best and brightest people on this, Mr. Izard. You don't need to be concerned. We got it covered.
Well, there's somebody thinking about it, that's for sure. So here, the legislature has taken a look at this. There are actually 2 bills on it, one of which is already dead, which would have aligned state law with federal law and said, okay, this is fine. We're not going to come after you for trying to follow federal law. Go ahead and do your thing and take your deduction.
So slow down there. So there was already a bill just to say, feds changed their law. Let's change our law to match it.
Correct.
No fuss, no muss.
And that one died in the Democratic House, so it's gone.
Did it get through the Senate?
It did not. It died straight in the House.
Straight in the House.
It was introduced in the House. It died in the first committee, the Education Committee.
Really? Isn't it funny? So just like the windfall in taxes, the fix for that died like that too. All right, so is there another fix?
Well, there's a second bill that very explicitly does not align Colorado law with federal law and says, in fact, that you cannot take a deduction for putting money into a 529 and using it for K-12. So rather than aligning it with federal law, it actually explicitly says we're not going to align with federal law and you guys are just going to have to deal with the consequences.
Wow. What negative Nancy put this one forward. So basically said, screw your kids, screw the people who put money into your kids' account. If you pull it out, we're coming after everybody.
But isn't it something that this just deals with K-12? It's okay if it's at the college level and they go to a private school, but there's something about K-12.
Something dirty about those damn K-12 kids.
Yeah, that there are certain politicians that just don't want any type of help at all for some kids to go to a private school, which might better fit their needs. In fact, parents could have been saving for years for college, and then they find out their child has a severe disability or something.
A learning disability needs extra help.
Yeah, and they need to go to a expensive private school that maybe has individualized plans.
So,
and they won't have. They have this pot of money sitting there.
This is worth a beard rub right here. So, what organization would not want to help out kids to go to a private school if that was better for them, even with somebody else's own money?
Well, I wonder.
I wonder.
I mean, I heard that the Colorado Education Association and the PTA both testify against the bill that would have allowed us to align
and their
with the
reasoning,
feds.
with a straight face, would have been.
Well, because of course it's going to harm public schools. Public schools need more money.
But
same old.
This doesn't hurt public schools. Matter of fact, it only helps public schools because anyway. Go ahead.
What's really interesting about it is that, so when the fiscal analysts of the legislature sat down and looked at this issue, they said, okay, worst case scenario, every single private school kid in Colorado opens a 529 account and they all contribute an average of $8,000 to $10,000 a year, which is crazy. This is a crazy scenario that will never happen. Under that scenario, it costs the state $15 million a year. Nightmare scenario, $15 million a year. It's about 0.2% of what the public education system brings in Colorado, 1/10 of 1% of the actual general fund revenue. So we're talking pennies.
Nothing.
pennies. And it's difficult too because not only do parents lose, but the state government.
Just do that one more time. All right, so I have a 529, and I'm able to put $100 in a month or something like that. I've been doing it forever. I don't know too many people who can actually afford to put in 10 grand a year. I would love to do that. You're telling me if everybody who had a kid did that and used it, it would cost the state how much?
$15 million.
Everybody that has
Total.
a child in private school?
Every single private school family in the state does this and puts in $8,000 to $10,000. It costs the state $15 million a year. That's the cost. So
it's a very small,
which is a very, very tiny number.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is that not only do parents lose here, but the state government actually loses on this too, because
How so?
Colorado Department of Revenue has no way to enforce this. So we kind of touched on it already. If you have 6 people put money into a 529 account over the course of several years, and somewhere down the line a parent decides to take that out for an unqualified withdrawal, like K-12 tuition, there's really no way for the state to go back and figure out whose money exactly was used for that and how to recapture it. And they don't have the data systems there in the first place to even recapture the money from parents. And so CDOR is kind of looking at this and realizing
CDOR?
CDOR is the Colorado Department of Revenue, and I think realizing they don't have the systems or the data or the processes or even the personnel, they say they'd have to hire 4 full-time people to deal with this, to actually enforce it even if this new bill were to pass. So it's quite a mess.
Less than a minute left. What's the solution here?
What's the solution?
What's the solution?
I don't know. We've been doing this for a couple of decades. We need new people in office that'll support all kids.
Right, or at least not make criminals out of people who just want to help them. What happens to this other bill? It's going to pass in the House, it'll die in the Senate, and then it's just where we are.
We'll see. If they don't address it, that ambiguity stays, things get complicated, so we'll have to see how it shakes out.
And then you've got to roll the dice if you want to be the first guy to use your new rights under the federal tax laws.
That's right.
Scary times to be a parent, but isn't it always? Hey, thank you so much. Good luck to you at ACE. Thank you for doing that. Check out the Independence Institute. Go to thinkfreedom.org. Listen for me on KL Radio. Read me in the Denver Post. We'll see you next week.